Okay, this video is going to be about George Orwell, academic hero number 21. Orwell was an Englishman. He got an academic scholarship to go to Eton, so he got to know what the English aristocracy was like. And then he was expected to go to university, but he followed in his father's footsteps, joined the civil service, and was an administrator, sort of with the police in Burma. And he saw a lot of the cruelty done to people of Indian and related descent in Burma. Actually, if you read the history about it, the Christian missionaries did a lot more to help the people of India than did the British civil service or the corporations. And of course, there was a lot of overlap within there. He volunteered to fight in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. He was actually on the side of the atheist communists fighting against the Catholics. He saw how the communists raped the nuns, executed the priests and the innocent civilians, and then burned down the churches. He was rather shocked by the cruelty. He himself and the group he was with was actually then targeted by Stalin, and he was lucky to escape from Spain with his life. As a matter of fact, he did get shot in the neck, which he survived, and he barely made it back alive to England. But that was a valuable experience, both seeing the BS with the civil service in Burma and seeing what really happened in Spain. He then worked for the BBC in Britain and a few other jobs during World War II. But so he had lots of experience with imperialism, with narrative shaping, all of this stuff. So he really knows what he's talking about. Orwell's two most famous books, Animal Farm and 1984, are two of the greatest books ever written. They're both in the top 20 and probably in the top 10 of books ever written. So here's a quote by George Orwell. "I thought of a rather cruel trick I once played on a wasp. He was sucking jam on my plate, and I cut him in half. He paid no attention. He merely went on with his meal, while a tiny stream of jam trickled out of his severed lower esophagus. Only when he tried to fly away did he grasp the dreadful thing that had happened to him. It is the same with modern man. The thing that has been cut away is his soul." Okay, Orwell continues. "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their understanding of history." And I think that's a relevant point because a lot of people would complain in the past, oh, why do we have to study Greek? Why do we have to study Latin? It's a waste of time. But the reality is there's very valuable knowledge to be obtained from studying the Greeks and the Romans. Lots of things happened in both of those populations, ancient Greece and ancient Rome, that are directly relevant to modern times. And if you don't know history, you don't have anything to compare to. You can't make sense out of what's happening in the world. Okay, continuing with Orwell. "If people cannot write well, they cannot think well. And if they cannot think well, then others will do their thinking for them." I've noticed too, I see high school students and college students doing their writing projects. Sometimes people are sent to me to advise students, and they get these rote writing projects, and they really, very few people know how to write well. I was shocked. The number of people that can actually write well, it's minuscule. And I'm including in people that have so-called good educations. To actually write well is a very rare skill. Okay, Orwell continues. "Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year. The whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought. In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words with which to express it. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness is always a little smaller. The purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression of the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of INGSOC, English socialism, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. These slogans were inscribed on the Ministry of Truth building. The Ministry of Peace concerns itself with war, the Ministry of Truth with lies, the Ministry of Love with torture, the Ministry of Plenty with starvation." Starvation is no joke. It's been a big technique. Look at what Stalin did to the Ukrainians. Starved millions and millions of them. Probably like 7 million of them he starved to death, between 1929 to 1933. Okay, in a sense, it's like people, when they have limited exposure to information and limited knowledge of history, in a sense, they're like the person's in Plato's cave looking at the shadows. They don't have any sense of reality. They've never tried to understand it for their own, and so they're very easy to control. They're sort of very stupid, easy to get to do whatever one wants. Orwell continues, a circus dog that jumps when the trainer cracks his whip is being trained, but the really well-trained dog is the one that'll do a somersault when there is no whip. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing, either in the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals. And that's what I see happening in nutrition. You know, all this high-fat nonsense of industry-sponsored stuff is getting promoted in a big way. And even though people are going to plant-based, most of them are high-fat plant-based, and they're not going to improve that much. Okay, Orwell continues, you must love Big Brother. It is not enough to obey him. You must love him. Okay, and why am I going through all this? Because Orwell is like the best writer who ever lived for pointing out this type of BS that gets people confused and makes them behave stupidly against their own interests. So by recognizing what Orwell says, you can be better informed for your own sake. Okay, Orwell continues. Threats to freedom of speech, writing, and action are often trivial in isolation, but are cumulative in their effect. And unless checked, they will lead to a general disrespect for the rights of the citizen. Yeah, because you hear about people being banned all the time from these internet social media sites, and that's a bad thing. Then the person gets demonized. You know what? People should be allowed to speak freely because you'll learn from them, even if you disagree with them, even if they're wrong, even if they're a jerk. Why shouldn't they be allowed to speak? You'll learn from them. And usually they're getting banned because they're actually doing something good, okay? I mean, the reason they're banned is because they don't follow some agenda or something, okay? Orwell continues, a mass of Latin words falls upon the facts like soft snow, and it blurs the outlines and covers up all the details. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish squirting out ink. Orwell continues, whatever is funny is subversive. Every joke is ultimately a custard pie. Orwell continues, the heresy of heresies was common sense. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. 1984 is like a masterpiece book. Everybody should read that book. If you want to be able to think, it's almost like a requirement. You want to think effectively in the modern world. Orwell continues, nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. Almost certainly, we are moving into an age of totalitarian dictatorships, an age in which freedom of thought will be at first a deadly sin, and later on a meaningless abstraction. The autonomous individual is going to be stamped out of existence. Now that's a bad thing, okay? Because it's also true that the smarter people are, the more nonconformist they are, all right? So what that means, and I've seen this, if you look at communist countries, they're incredibly stupid relative to what one would expect. Like look at Russia, you know, from 1917 to 2017. How much art or good literature have they produced? They stink, okay? And that's what happens with communist countries. Look at their farmers. They stink, you know. Communism causes, 100 years of bad weather because it's not in their interest to be productive. Okay, Orwell continues. Literature is doomed if liberty of thought perishes. The only two good books I'm aware of that came out of Russia in the last 100 years are Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. And that's because they criticized the place. Name one good painting. I'm not aware of a single good painting that's come out of Russia in the last 100 years. None. Zero. Okay. Orwell continues. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That's right. Offensive speech should be allowed on the internet, okay? People should be allowed to say what they want in social media. They should not be banned. Because all kinds of bad stuff doesn't get banned. And then usually the people that get banned are people who just simply don't agree with popular opinion. Well, good. Let's hear what they have to say. You should recognize that and give a fair chance to people who are getting banned to speak, because what I've seen is a lot of the good stuff gets banned and a lot of the bad stuff does not get banned. Why should anything be banned? If you don't have free speech, you really are one step away from having no freedom. It's a big deal. It's better to let people speak who you disagree with than to not have any free speech. Okay, in the end, Orwell continues, the further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. In the end, the party would announce that 2 plus 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. If you had the kind of brain that could understand the poems of T.S. Eliot, the higher-ups would see to it that you were kept out of any important job. From childhood upwards, everything is done to make the minds of men and women conventional and sterile. Take a look at what high school does to kids. They go into high school with still some vestige of their family influence, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They come out of high school sort of sullen, angry, and just most of them kind of conformist and stupid. They all hang around kids the same age. They read the same books that make them hate reading. They stop reading, and then they're just sort of shallow and ignorant. Is sort of like the effect of high school upon the minds of young people. And if by misadventure some spark of imagination remains, its unfortunate possessor is considered unsound and dangerous, worthy only of contempt in time of peace, and of prison or a traitor's death in time of war. Orwell continues, whenever there is enforced orthodoxy, good writing stops. Conformity is boring, okay? And if that's the only thing allowed, all the writing is boring. Orwell continues, how could you have a slogan like freedom is slavery when the concept of freedom has been abolished? The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. So this was a character in the book 1984, and his name is Syme, which is a joke. You know, he amputates the language, and Syme is the name of amputation in the foot. Okay, Orwell continues. When dogma is contradicted, the established label it as heresy and claim the speaker has bad motives. And that's very common. You see that all the time in social media and the popular press, that whenever somebody says something that's not desired by whoever runs the website or whatever, they just say the person, they criticize their motive. They say, oh, this person is whatever label you want to stick them with. But the point is, they don't answer the arguments. They don't discuss the topic in terms of what's true or not. They simply say, oh, this is a bad person because of blah, blah, blah. It's a way to label the person. Okay, Orwell continues. The proles can be granted liberty because they have no intellect. Those among them who are gifted and ambitious and who might possibly become a nuclei of discontent are simply marked down by the thought police and eliminated. Right now they eliminate people from social media. What are they going to do to them in the future, okay? People should stand up for the people being banned and for free speech, because if you don't, you're going to find out that it won't even be allowed at all in the future. Orwell continues, the party can successfully impose its ideology on those who, like the proles, lack interest or ability to understand what they have been asked to believe, since they could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. By their lack of understanding, they remained sane. They simply swallowed everything, and what they swallowed did not harm them because it left no residue behind, just as a grain of corn will pass undigested through the body of a bird. So that's kind of funny. So the proles, implying the poor, ignorant, uneducated persons in this context of 1984, he's basically saying they weren't so affected by all the brainwashing going on because, they were basically functionally illiterate and didn't pay attention to it. So they remained normal in their common sense, even though they lacked all the literary flair and all that other stuff. Okay, George Orwell continues. A hedonistic lifestyle weakens people. So that's a good statement, and that comes out of, you remember, Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World. back around the 1930s, and that's one path to a population just becoming sedated and stupid and easy to control is because they're hedonistic, always looking for, alcohol or substance abuse, like the substance abuse in the 1960s, versus Orwell's is the more aggressive, overt brainwashing. And so was Russia, of course. So Orwell continues, the people will believe what the media tells them to believe. Yeah, and that had been pointed out as well by the Germans. Basically, all you do is you repeat something, and the average low IQ, functionally illiterate person will believe it. It doesn't even matter what it is. It just gets repeated a lot, and they go, oh, yeah, that's what everyone else believes. Yeah, sure, okay. And Solomon Asch, the psychologist, did experiments on this. You could get people to say the short line was longer than the long line if they simply saw the other people sitting at the table agree with it. They really didn't even care about what was true or not. They just cared about agreeing with everyone else. And that's a bad sign, because what happens is when there's institutionalized cruelty to people, most people just go along with whatever the institution recommends that's paying them, and that can lead to a lot of bad behavior, as we've seen in the last century. Stalin killed 65 million people. Mao over 100 million. Okay. Continuing here. What opinions the masses hold or do not hold is looked on as a matter of indifference. They can be granted intellectual liberty because they have no intellect. Freedom of the intellect because they have no intellect. In the party member, on the other hand, not even the slightest deviation of opinion on the most unimportant subject can be tolerated. Orwell continues, whoever controls the image and information of the past determines what and how future generations think. He who controls the past controls the future. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 is 4. If that is granted, then all else follows. The past is whatever the records and the memories agree upon. And since the party is in full control of all the records, and equally full control of the minds of its members, it follows that the past is whatever the party chooses to make it. 2 + 2 = 5. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And that's also the case, too. The Soviets would just take a person out of a picture, delete them from the records, and it was as if they never existed. Now, I will tell you the answer to my question. It is this. Now, this is O'Brien speaking to Winston in the book 1984. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, pure power. What power means you will understand presently. We are different from the oligarchies of the past in that we know what we are doing. All of the others, even those who resembled ourselves, were cowards or hypocrites. The Germans and the Russians came very close to us in their methods, but they never had the courage to recognize their own motives. They pretended, perhaps they even believed, that they had seized power unwillingly and for a limited time, and that just around the corner there lay a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. Well, we are not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means. Power is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now you begin to understand me. And I think this is the last slide. So Orwell continues, to write in plain, vigorous language, one has to think fearlessly. And if one thinks fearlessly, one cannot be politically orthodox. And the essential point here is that all the people with small, insecure incomes are in the same boat and ought to be fighting on the same side. Probably we could talk a little less about capitalist and proletarian and a little more about robbers and the robbed. George Orwell. Okay, Orwell continues. The scene of the book in 1984 is laid in Britain in order to emphasize that the British-speaking races are innately no better than anyone else. and that totalitarianism, if not fought against, could triumph anywhere. The moral from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Do not let it happen. It depends on you. I actually saw a video of Orwell saying that. Orwell continues, this is from 1984. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, and did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. Orwell continues, within 20 years at the most, every record had been destroyed or falsified. Every book had been rewritten. Every picture had been repainted. That's another reason why it's good to have a hard copy. Like if you like a rock and roll group, a music group, whatever the type of classical music composer, if possible, try to have a copy of their audio CD or have your own copy on a thumb drive or something, because it could just be deleted from the internet. I mean, the internet is not like this big free speech thing. Very discreetly, stuff can just get deleted. So try to have a hard copy of something if you really want to make sure it stays preserved. I noticed all these audiobooks are now available only by, on a cell phone. Well, it'd be better to have the audio CD. Then you could listen to it again. You could give it to a friend, on a cell phone. They could just decide, well, the author said something controversial. Delete the book. Okay, so, I see this level of freedom and intellect and education slipping away. And it's much worse, I think, than most people realize. Okay, Orwell continues. Within 20 years at the most, every record destroyed or falsified. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. The huge and simple question, was life better before revolution than it is now, would have ceased once and for all to be answerable. Everything faded into the mist. The past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became the truth. He, Winston, would be ready to believe that black was white and white was black if the party required it. There was no particle of himself left inside of him, which was not at one with the party, which did not belong to it. Okay, from 1984. So that's a pretty sad ending at 1984. But anyways, there's a lesson learned. Be aware of all this stuff, and hopefully it won't get worse.